One.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our last Stay Engaged session on the future of work, learning, and dare I say entrepreneurship. Looking around at all the great faces I've come to recognize over the past few weeks that have attended. Thank you all for coming, for being engaged, for staying engaged. Dan will talk about what we're cooking up kind of after this series that has been for me personally, a very valuable, challenging, inspiring experience. And I hope that you feel the same way for those who've been able to partake of these conversations. The networking we do in the breakout rooms has been great as well. And we will be continuing this work for the foreseeable future, just with a few different little changes as we've been thinking about our role in the community. But really happy to be here. And the two people with whom I'll be chatting in the flag side, my little New Mexico United flag side chat here, I'm blessed to be able to call friends, and not just in one case a colleague, but Erica Barrero, who will introduce herself, as well as Travis Kellerman. And it's going to be a great discussion, hopefully one that I'll take a little backseat on and let the two of them discuss a wide range of future trends that are so important for all of us to be thinking about actively. I think about it this way: when the iPhone came out, that was when my folks, my parents and older people and younger people, we all started talking about app updates and OSs like that. It went mainstream, this talk about software. I think now we're in the mainstream need to talk about the future, like for all of us to become futurists, which I'll ask you about, Travis, what the heck that actually means. But this is a very important discussion, a very important time. As I talk to you all on my camera on my iPad that's propped up so I can stand, the earth is literally burning to my window. I'm looking down the canyon, and the smoke is in the air. It's like quite a metaphor, isn't it? Smokes, fires, they thin things out. They help us in the cultivation process, in a sense. But fire season is a difficult one and destroys homes and things like that. So just coronavirus, the civil conversation that's been going on, but has reached a really important inflection point, I think, as Dan mentioned, with Charles and the work that's being done by the community here in Albuquerque specifically. It's a lot to take in right now, and it's a lot to think about 3, 6, 12 months in the future. So I'm hoping that Erica and Travis will be able to put some clarity around this, get us to ask some great questions of ourselves, of our work, and it's done in such a way that you all feel empowered. One thing we are going to do after 30, 40 minutes here in the flag side chat with Erica and Travis, we'll be putting you in breakout rooms. The three of us will join, help facilitate those breakout rooms, but you'll meet 3 or 4 others, 2 or 3 others, I should say, for about 15 minutes, have a conversation, reflect on the flag side chat we had, and meet a few cool people. So at that point, we'll definitely encourage you to put your videos on, your cameras on, and engage in that discussion. There's been some really good people meeting people here in this networking modality. Yes, it's a little awkward if it's your first time. And yes, Dan likes to wield his godlike powers and pull us back before any of us want to, but we use the tools we have available to us, and it's going to be good. And then after that, we'll come back and you'll be able to, and I'll just facilitate it, ask Erica and Travis some questions specific to things they said, other events that you're wondering about, this technology, what is your take on it, that kind of a thing. So as we're talking now, feel free to, jot down a question, and then in the chat after the fireside, after the breakout rooms, you'll be able to put those questions in the chat. Okay, I want you to meet these two fine individuals. Erica, who is Erica Barrero, and how did you come into the work specifically of thinking about the future of work and learning? Introduce us to yourself.
So real briefly, my roots are in teacher education. I started my career as a high school teacher, working with students that have historically been marginalized by educational systems. And I developed a passion around thinking about how do we do education differently. So I think I've always been interested in the future of learning. The intersection of the future of work and learning came in my service the last 7 years as the Dean for the School of Communication, Humanities, and Social Sciences, really looking at what is the role of liberal arts and the humanities in thinking about the future of work. And through that work, got involved with our college and was appointed as a fellow to lead our college in thinking about the future of work and learning. So for the last year and a half, 2 years, I've been really actively engaged in helping leaders at our college as well as across the community understand what those future trends are and what are the ways that we need to be thinking differently about how we respond in our organizations to better position ourselves for the future of work and learning.
And Erica, thank you for that. I've been the beneficiary of some of those sessions you've led, the voices you've brought in to C&M, since ABQID Fund is managed by C&M Ingenuity, and we're a part of that family. So I just want to personally thank you for the questions you've helped me ask of myself and our work, but also the generative discussion, seeing a room full of leaders at the college ask questions about what could it look like and what might it look like given this framework you've given us for how to think about technological change. It's been really rewarding, and I'm not just drinking from the Kool-Aid here, people, but I really think C&M is doing incredible work in shifting the status quo, attempting to, and being an institution that's not afraid to ask those types of questions. And Erica, thank you for your leadership in that. And not just at C&M, but the community, really, the way you pull people together. So good stuff. Travis Kellerman, introduce yourself, Travis. I know you and I, how did we first meet? I forget, but it was through the startup community. But I distinctly remember the coffee shop we were at and leaving and feeling like my head was throbbing, you know, after you play a good brain board game or just engage in what I engage in, which was a discussion that went this way and that way. But from day one, Travis, I've appreciated your companionship, friendship, the way you get me thinking at a higher level. But why don't you help others who haven't had that benefit yet get to know your path that's led you to thinking about the future and having this term applied to you, futurist.
It goes both ways, TJ. I always get expanded with your compassionate approach to thought leadership, if you will. Those are abstract terms, but I started in politics. I worked for Martin Heinrich and Tom Udall. I also worked for a slate of people you probably haven't heard of because they weren't elected. And my idealism there was based around trying to enact some kind of political policy, governmental change. And a lot of as we're seeing now, the polarization makes it impossible for some kind of substantive or collaborative change to happen. I then got involved in technology. My first successful startup there was Lavu. And as a co-founder, we scaled up from essentially 4 people at a kitchen table to around, now I believe it's 200 people. It was around 50 when I left. I went over to Asia, came back to New Mexico, did a series of startups in between, learned about data and data philosophy. And really landing in the term futurist was from some of my work at Descartes Labs, who some of you may know up in Santa Fe, using satellite imagery, sensors, all these data streams that are coming together to create digital twins of the earth and views and perspectives on where things are going. So you can create predictive platforms, predictive models. Futurism is about the future, and nothing is ever exact or perfect, but I like that challenge. And I used to not be able to say that term with a straight face, but in a way, everyone should be a futurist. And we're talking about the future of work. Futurism will be part of that. You will be required to engage in what that vision will be. What is your contribution to it? Do you agree with it? That's part of the dialogue. So where I'm at now is finally becoming a founder again, launching a new company around ESG data, environmental, social, and governance, to essentially determine the new values of future markets. So thanks for having me here, and stoked for the conversation, because this is a really important topic and it's on a very historic day, and there's framings for this too.
Yeah. You dropped a little bomb that at the very end that has piqued I know my interest and others about a new startup. So I want to follow up on that later. But as helpful as it can be in a short 25-minute flagside chat, I think what we wanted to do is really hand it back over to Erica to kind of frame the time we're in and how we can therefore think about the future in a way that's helpful. That's a model that we can all use. Maybe three to five of the mega trends that are being accelerated here. So Erica, the work that you've been doing, we joked, right? You've been the fellow at C&M for the Future Work and Learning for 1 year, and we said 1/3 years, given everything that's happened in your tenure in that capacity. But big question, what are the big trends that we all should be thinking about right now and seeking to apply and fixate on as we are entrepreneurs, founders, leaders in our startups and our community?
Great. And I think Dan has a couple slides that I put together to share with folks, if you can pop those up. And one really starts with a quote that I feel very deeply, especially pre-COVID, even pre-COVID. There's a quote that says, the future is here, it's just unevenly distributed. And so there were different places where we were feeling it. But I think what we're particularly seeing is that the business models that were developed and really solidified and really encoded, quite frankly, in our organizational DNA of the third industrial revolution are no longer suited for what we're moving into, the fourth industrial revolution. So, there's this great uncertainty of having to figure out how do we successfully transition from what used to work very well to what will work now. And that uncertainty, of course, has been elevated and heightened with COVID. So Dan, if you can move it to the next slide. I'm a big fan of Heather McGowan. I don't know if you're familiar with her work, but she's written a few articles in Forbes that I would encourage you to look at. But one of the things that she talks about is that the coronavirus was an accelerant. It didn't, there may be lasting changes from it, and I hope that there are some very positive changes, but the things that we now are feeling very acutely were coming anyway. What it has done has accelerated it, the speed at which we are now it's become more evenly distributed, our experience with the future of work. So Dan, if you'll go ahead and take it to that next slide. There are a lot of trends out there. I picked the 5 that I think resonate the most with me. And one of those trends, speaks to the modality in which we are experiencing right now, how we are able to interact and learn, but it's this idea of flexible work. And that is something that as organizations and leaders, we need to figure out, how do we create flexibility for people to engage in different ways of working, in different modalities of working, in different ways of building and collaborating, as teams. And I think I'll leave it at that and let Travis speak a little bit to why flexible work is such an important trend, especially as we think about what today is.
Yeah.
There's a shared conception that flexible work means increased cost, but really it's the unlock for creative potential. The slide before this, when Erica, you were introducing that concept from Heather McGowan around accelerating change and how this recent crisis is contributing to our human adaptation acceleration. The idea here that the new innovation and the technology change curve is beyond where we're at, there's the difference. If you look at funds like ARK Invest, call it a futurist investment fund, they view this digital explosion as the next great wave of wealth creation. So if the future is just being distributed in an unequal way, it's because of that gap that we haven't figured out how to include human roles in some of this accelerating change. Closing that gap, part of it is the fact that in all this massive increase in wealth, there's plenty of budget to go around for enabling and investing in flexible work. We're also doing this on a day that marks 2.5 years between the Emancipation Proclamation and the final freeing of the slaves in 1865 in Texas. People that had no choice and had virtually they had no flexibility in work. They had no choice about work. The precedence to that, what came before in industrial capitalism, has really seeded a lot of our current understandings of rigid, defined views of work and people as inputs to production. Mm-hmm. So that mindset is so deeply embedded in some cultures and in many of our systems that it is going to take some pretty bold moves by leaders, employees pushing back. If unions have declined significantly over the past century, what does that look like for some kind of collective action to remedy the unequal treatment of people, and doing that in honoring their true purpose in work? Because a lot of these systems don't do that. So flexible work, there's a very privileged way to look at it, and there's also, in the larger context of history, to say, if you're in a place where you have flexibility in your work, know that there are others that have no flexibility, that they are still working in shifts, that they are on the front lines of a crisis like this, and working flexibility into that and honoring their human value and potential is really important. That it's a collective responsibility, and it can start in your own culture. So I'm kind of calling in many ways to, there's a few different pieces of work here to do that are beyond our own personal work or how we define that. The flexible creative potential here is huge. And the gap between technology and where humans fit in that, that's the tragedy we can solve, actually. And by including that, which something we'll get to, I believe, is the human-machine collaboration point. Where do we take away what makes people machines, and where do we hand it off to machines? How do we let them be more human and creative? Because that's where we know all the competitive advantages and alphas are. So if we're going to keep subscribing to this kind of market, we need to understand human creative potential is the next profit advantage.
So things coming to my mind are, the gig economy that the poster child of which, for good or for ill, Uber has become. I'm thinking about the conversation we had last week here at Stay Engaged around B corporations, worker-owned cooperatives, some of those models that have existed. Do you see those, and this is for Erica and Travis, do we have the vehicles we need to drive that change, or are there yet, are there emerging business models, structures, kind of behaviors that you're seeing in a few, like Travis, from your vantage point, startups, or Erica, from your vantage point, college structures or educational structures? Does that make that question make sense? Trying to land the plane a little bit on the high level concept that flexible work has been accelerated, and what that might look like for a founder who's starting a startup today when they get traction and they start building a team. How should I build my team to be part of that change and respective of that change, so that my business is resilient within the broader frame? Is that a straightforward question enough?
I have a few thoughts on structures that might help. The origins of my own family, I know the union struggle from my father, my grandfather, my great uncle, and that kind of industrial unionism, giving some form to collective bargaining, which was a pushback, worker safety, worker rights, and some kind of shared movement around valuing people in the workplace, because especially in industrial capitalism, a lot of that production is based around viewing people purely as inputs, as I said, but also we're creating commodities here. We're creating steel. We're maybe a little further along. We're using skilled workers to build locomotives. So that these old views, the only way to maintain some kind of dignity and also some kind of safety and protection was to have a collection of workers bargain for their power and their right to certain respects and certain things to protect themselves. So the idea now that you're moving into a state where, well, we're past industrialization, we're now almost past the service economy. The ability of unions and the prevalence of that has shrunk to less than 10% of the workforce. What does it look like to have those kinds of checks and balances? If at one point workers were displaced and seen as separate from the company, what does it mean to bring them back into ownership of the company? And there's a few models there that have been proven to actually have competitive advantage and greater returns. Employee stock ownership plans, where employees own part of the company and are invested in it, directly ties them to the outcomes of that company. This isn't just giving a few shares to employees, but really having them involved, where they have a significant portion, employees own a significant portion of the company. Ideally, I would say that you need to look at there's some kind of majority ownership or intention there. It's certainly something that we're embracing in this new company I'm part of. And I really believe there's an advantage in that. It's proven that those models bring better returns. Now, if you're a smaller company, getting to that point where you're over 20 employees and you can have a model like that requires that kind of inclusive equity split and ownership to begin with. So really value your co-founders, really value the people that are starting out in a small business with you who are invested in that. It'll naturally bring them into the company and you'll start to see those returns because they're literally invested in the outcome of this business. So moving from that, it might not be a leapfrog of unionism, but it's a way to get back to that same state of respect and really a serendipity or crossover that merges those two. So employee ownership is a really important concept. What stake do your employees have in the outcomes here beyond their salary, beyond just clocking in and out?
Yeah, and the big mental shift being they're not inputs, they're assets. They're not liabilities, they're assets. And that has so much implication for how you then structure it from the get-go. Eric, I was wondering, I butted in before you could. How do you see this trend landing for, the would-be or current entrepreneurs thinking about flexible work and therefore how to build out their team, company, their offering in the marketplace? What would you say to help us think as concretely as possible about this trend?
Well, and I think what I would say is, we put up 5 bullet points that are really very deeply interconnected. So why is flexible work important? Because it humanizes your workplace culture. Why is Why is humanized workplace culture so critical? Well, not only because we, hope that people agree with the moral argument of the importance of valuing people, but because honestly, people are your biggest asset in the future of work. Why is that true? Because people are going to need to be able to adapt and learn rapidly. So your investment in people's, the uniquely human skills, right? The things that low level task work that's repetitive, that can be done by machines. Now we will do that by machines. What humans add is their ability, again, to be team leaders, to be empathizers, to recognize patterns. And so in all of this, it's about how do you truly leverage human potential? Because that is the only competitive advantage. When things are moving so quickly, one of the things I talk about is, listen, the old model was you could go to school and it was a one and done. You go to school, you get your degree, you're given a skill set that for many people lasted their lifetime of a career with some tweaks. Now the statistic is, listen, you graduate from college today and plan on having 17 different careers over 5 different job sectors. And there's no way that a single kind of learning experience is going to be able to, to create the kind of quote unquote workers or employees that we need. So what we really need is to invest in people, for people to be engaged in their workplace, to feel valued, because they will bring value back to the institution. So as we talk about what do people need to do as they build their team, as they build their work environment, it's really centering everything around the employee experience, around who your team is, around bringing people that understand not only the importance of the product, but the importance of the people in order to move your company forward.
So this is really cool. The flexible work, when I first saw that bullet point, and I'm sure everybody else, work from home. There's going to be more work from home, but this is much deeper than that. This is talking about employee centricity, worker centricity, as much as one modality of working from home.
Yeah, and
go ahead.
I was just going to say, I also want to say a point again on that flexible work is that is that flexible work also allows for more people to participate. So, you just think about flexible work as it relates to parents who are, or caretakers of their own parents, or people, I know right now, many colleagues who are colleagues of color, quite frankly, who are thriving in the remote work environment because they were not comfortable in some of the teams and the workplaces that were structured in these very kind of top-down command control, hierarchical structures that now there's this sense of freedom and autonomy that someone's not always watching and judging everything I do. So I would just also think flexible work is about how we engage different people in different ways to be able to maximize their potential in the ways that they can contribute.
Danny, can you throw up the slide again? This is really good. I want to make sure we kind of cover or see the conversation for our breakout rooms as best we can. You talked about human-machine interaction, the coming wave of automation that really has already started, but now is again accelerated in times of recession. Businesses will choose to automate away some costs, which means displacement of workers. Like maybe Travis, kick it over to you. Are you more concerned by that? Oh crap, what are we going to do? As thinking economically, not just entrepreneurially, or do you see that again as an opportunity, or is it a little bit of both?
Definitely both. And I wanted to just quickly address a question in the chat from Usama that he asked about what was the kind of employee ownership in startups I've been involved with in the past. And not to get into specifics, but I'll say not enough. And it really needs to change. In fact, there's a huge disparity now in what is owned and what is given to investors what is given to founders and co-founders as opposed to other employees. So that kind of inequality there causes major rifts and temporary movements of people. When it comes to adaptation and learning, replacement of people, this idea that someone, for example, you brought up Uber. It's very reminiscent of the origins of industrial capitalism. The manufacture of cotton, weavers were given less than what they made as independent artisans and independent producers, and they were just given sort of subsistence wages. You see the same thing in technology layers like Uber and hires. So they're not considered employees, they're not given those same benefits, but also they're used as a temporary bridge until we get to autonomous vehicles or until we get to something more efficient. And there's no course for them to invest in their own futures or discover their own futures in a way. So re-education, there's a lot of cliches and orthodoxy around, well, you need to constantly be learning, constantly be investing in things. It's also the responsibility of employers to help people adapt and evolve. And that natural ability is there with everyone if they have psychological security on the teams that they're on, in the companies they're at, if they have leaders that seed those. And if there's less turnover, those costs become reduced and they can be invested in educating and expanding your own workforce instead of your employees, instead of trying to look for the next person to replace who's going to leave. So that insistence on that's going to start being priced into markets. And right now it's a competitive advantage for adaptive learning, for finding the new alpha, the new model that gives you this competitive advantage in the current market. But soon it'll be an existential risk because you won't be able to avoid these things. The governance push right now will be, how do you treat people? How do you keep them on? How do you keep them employed? How do you make sure that they're sustained in their employment and their own evolution and growth? And if you do that correctly, you'll have this massive efficiency increase and you'll be leading this new market instead of struggling to stay involved and convince people through PR moves that you are investing in your people, as opposed to just showing it in the legacy of what they do, how long they stick around, how they grow into new positions, or how they redefine their own titles and positions within them. So it's flexibility in the culture, it's ability to learn themselves, and also the support to do that. Psychological support, resources within the company, and the ability to move outside of their sort of lane and hierarchy.
And so I wanted to ask this, because what I hear you saying is, look, this is happening, and 10 years from now, you're either going to be a company and a founder, a team, the leader that gets it and has built that into your structures, or you're not. And whatever industry you're in, whatever your competitive landscape is, whoever does that well will emerge victorious, or not really victorious in this collaborative model, but will be a sustainable company, resilient company. I want to believe that, but I do want to challenge it too. So far, that hasn't been the case, right? Uber is still valued where Uber is valued, and that's still happening. Is now the timing when you see the critical mass of movement and support toward that change happening? Is that, the B Corp movement, are we reaching a time where that's going to be critical mass, or is this still a call to, like, it takes all of us on this call, all entrepreneurs, to make this happen, to make it get mainstream? Is it inevitable, or do we have to be the change we want to see still?
So the answer is yes, because if you're an orthodox anything, free market, Marxist, anyone who sees a utopia in the future, if you subscribe to a certain flavor of futurism, it's always either moving towards utopia or dystopia. The reality is these trends have origins, and their origins are always within people. Markets tend to price out emotion. In fact, economics is a way, it's almost a science to explain away emotion from markets. And the reality is movements and trading within markets, it's all based on emotion. It's actually a mapping, it's a visualization. Those actions and behaviors are showing the fear and greed cycles of humans involved in capitalism. So here's the reality. If you start to price these things into markets, when call it a progressive company, takes on those governance principles early on, they start to see advantages in the governance demand side. So consumers, like someone who can afford to buy Patagonia everything, they're going to look for sustainable supply chains and workers that are treated well. Maybe they'll buy Fat Tire beer over other beers because it's an employee-owned company. So there's already that kind of middle-class demand curve that's there, but you're going to start to see that proliferate down. And it's not just through regulation, which is usually quite inefficient. When you seed those things in the supply side of the market, you start to recognize that there's products with greater value and the utility of them changes. So the entire definition of utility changes here. If, for example, you have a differentiated commodity, if you have a cleaner version of energy, and this is what we're working on right now, is trying to prove and say, here's a different version of a core, say, fossil fuel or energy that not only meets the same energy requirements, does it in a cleaner way and has greater value in the market. And everyone needs this energy to operate. So it's a shared commodity. This isn't some specialized fleece vest from Patagonia that might only subscribe to a few layers of economic status. This is a shared utility by everyone. So when you start moving at that level, you can.
Sorry to interrupt, but you're saying, and your company's name is Quotient, right? The new.
I'm not doing a promo spot, but I do have a direct connection to this, and I
just wanted to land it because you're saying there's oil and then there's oil in the sense, and part of the mission of your company is to be part of that awareness that's required in order to make those more, shall we say, informed decisions that undergird this new reality where we see the impacts of everything, and that you're bringing the data to the table. Is that right?
If you can quantify and show those impacts, then the environmental part, the social part, the governance part, those things can all be properly priced in the markets, because you can't deny the effects they have on the people that consume them, or the production lines and the communities that are involved in that production. So if you quantify and price that into markets, it changes the bottom lines. And I believe that's the future that requires an active effort.
That's really cool. That's really cool. Not an easy lift, but we could be at an inflection point. We have the data. Now we're going to use it, and in using it will enable the decisions that will affect this type of future that we're seeing. Erica, before we kind of meet some folks in breakout rooms and grapple with what we've been talking about, any thoughts you're having? Any insights you want us to make sure we glean before we go into breakout rooms regarding these 5 trends that are so interrelated?
I think what I'll do is just respond to maybe the question that you asked Travis and some of his comments by saying, when you talk to futurists, there are many possible futures. We are not passive actors in it. Technology isn't going to do something to us. We are the authors of what technology can do for us. And so I would say to the audience that is here, as entrepreneurs, as startups, especially as startups, you are operating in an ecosystem where you can be the model for how it can be done differently in a way that both has economic impact, but also has social impact. And I think that is part of the conversation that we're hearing so loudly today, that it shouldn't be one at the cost of other, that it can be both. And that, one of the comments that I heard recently that just really resonated with me is that the decisions companies are making today will define their brand for the next 30 years. And I hope that is true. I hope that we look at the decisions that companies are making, and that those that are taking care of people and social good will also be those that emerge, that will have followers, because people say, I'm choosing you as a company because you kept that as a priority. So I would add that.
That's awesome. And I wanted you to share with that last quote you had for us to help us have some great breakout room discussions. But while Dan, maybe you're pulling that up, I think it's the last slide, if I'm not mistaken. Yep. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to break up into breakout rooms and try to apply this, right? Try to reflect on it. I'm a verbalizer. I think all of us, to a certain extent, need to process through conversations like this, but we want you to apply it to your current business. How are you going to carry these trends into how you build your current business? If you don't have a business, you may be part of an organization, which essentially is a business. And within your role in that organization, how are you wondering about how these apply, and what's it gotten you thinking about, wondering about? And then frankly, the part I love most about these breakout rooms is, hey, share something you're working on. Like, what's an idea you're working on, a new startup, an initiative within your company that's resultant from what's happening right now, et cetera. In general, whether it's related to this conversation or not, kick some ideas around with some cool people and get to know each other. So Dan will tell you the specific kind of question prompts we have and how this breakout room thing works. And then we'll get started. We'll come back for some Q&A with Erica and Travis. Take it away, Dan.
All right, thank you so much, everyone. So if you're not familiar with breakout rooms, you're going to go into a new session with a handful of people. In the chat group, I'm going to encourage you to copy and paste this into a Word doc, but in groups of about 4 or so, work together on this primary question. The focus question is, how might these future work trends impact your organization, and what pivots do you need to make to be ready for it? If you got extra time, usually we don't, because Dan uses his God mode, as TJ likes to say, to bring you all back into the main session. But if you do have extra time, feel free to just talk about entrepreneurial opportunities that you're seeing in the midst of this kind of COVID era. So if anything goes wrong, feel free to come back to the main room. There's a little button that will say leave breakout room, and you'll come back to the main thread, and we'll try to get you back in, okay? All right, I got the breakout rooms ready, and we'll see you back. TJ, how long are we going? We going 15 minutes or so?
15 today.
Okay, 15 minutes. So don't hog all the time. Share, people, share. Have a great breakout. Did we not put you in a room there, Ken? Oh, you know what? I think you came in before. You can unmute yourself, Ken.
Okay. How you doing today?
Doing all right. Did we not get you in a room?
No, that's fine. I'm just lurking today.
You're a lurker?
Yeah.
That's a StarCraft creature. A lurker.
Okay. Well, maybe I should put my hat on different then.
There's a room with only a few people. Can I throw you in that one?
No, that's fine.
All right.
I'd rather keep your company.
Keep me company. I'm gonna be eating some food.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'll join you in a virtual.
Cheers.
Yeah.
How are things going?
Good. I spent an hour on the phone with Lawrence Chavez here this morning on the one pager. Had some great.
Thank you. Welcome back. I hope you had really great breakouts. And thank you, Rick Shore, for like clockwork presenting us with our first awesome question for Erica and Travis for this open Q&A now. Rick asks, what are your thoughts on the 180 CEOs who signed a pledge last year to reprioritize people over profits? Is this real or just lip service? Erica, Travis, not sure if you read that article, that news. What are your specific thoughts on that one?
Well, I like to say I'm a pragmatic optimist, and just the statement in and of itself can help shift culture. But I think we are seeing some companies backing up that idea with action. Is it a publicity move for some? Sure it is. And we've, certainly seen several critics, in recent days around the idea of issuing a statement is not enough. We need to see structural and systemic change. But I do believe that there are many companies that are also stepping forward to realize that vision. And so I find hope that in that statement, and there's a real underlying kind of business motivation in that Travis and I have both already talked about, and that is that investing in people actually results in profit.
Yeah. Travis, any specific thoughts on this one?
I'm going to take the hybrid approach that Erica just led on. There's a balance here. There's no doubt this is a PR move, that just the fact that you're organizing 180 CEOs to make a unified statement or sign on to something. It's akin to a petition. It's akin to any kind of organization and promotion of some idea. The details here are what matters. So from those CEOs, what are their actual plans and what are the ways they're going to quantify and measure the progress towards those? So do they have key objectives and results around this? Do they have a plan and a strategy to meet those? And what's the timeline? So if you say you're going to do something like create a new product, when is that product going to be available? What are you going to do to make it? Who are you going to involve in that production? If you say you're going to put people over profits, how are you going to do that? How are you going to measure and prove to everyone that you do that? And is that going to be priced into what you're saying, what your final end products are? So I come back to, if you quantify these things and you convince people with data and with your strategy and with your plan, and then really hold yourself accountable to delivering on that. If you measure the wellness increase, the growth increase, the ability for someone to earn more, to produce more, how are you measuring these things? So there's not some standard template, because this is kind of new territory in a lot of ways. It's nice to say you're putting people over profits. How do you price people into your profits? And then you're accountable for both.
Yeah, your product analogy is super, super helpful there. It's like nobody pats a CEO on the back saying, I signed a pledge that I'm going to launch a new product next year. And everybody goes, all right, stock price goes up. And we shouldn't do the same for pronouncements of pretty fundamental, what would be fundamental change. So good stuff, good word. Francisco asked a really great question here, which is great to apply this thinking to maybe specific industries, but what do you see in the future of cybersecurity? It's a pretty hot industry right now. How are you thinking about that specifically with all these changes?
There's a few major trends here. One that I'm actually quite familiar with, based on a startup I'm advising, is the total lack of security in IoT. So the Internet of Things, about 90+% of these devices that are being deployed, there's about 20 billion of them deployed right now, are completely unsecured. They're transmitting data in plain text. So anyone who's picking up that data can read verbatim what information is being sent. The IoT, that extreme edge, these deployed sensors that are out in the field, if those are totally unsecured and you can intercept that message, change it, and then send some other kind of instruction back to the main data center, that can really affect how businesses operate, how governments and cities operate. And IoT is only going to get more expansive. So it's 20 billion now, it's going to be 70 billion in the next 5 years. For every person on the planet, there's going to be essentially 10 devices that are online. And when you get to a point like that, where devices outnumber people and can almost impersonate people in what they're sending, then those constant streams of data that affect these automated systems, you have the potential for it's a major risk and systemic disruption there. On the other end, you have increasing AI cyber attacks on both sides. So artificial intelligence is waging attacks. AI is kind of compensating for those attacks and defending them on the other side. And you have to look at cybersecurity architects as the human role in the middle of deciding, where do you prioritize what's worth defending? How do you put this up there? And also, why are you exposing yourself to attack? Why are people attacking you? What's your role in the larger business environment? So those are kind of fundamental questions that instead of assuming that cybersecurity is inevitable or cyber attacks are inevitable, what can you do to modify maybe your operations and also your own ethos and your goals and your business, your own business model itself, operational model, so that you don't have to deal with that. Everything's interconnected. There's certain protections that are growing, and it's pretty much in lockstep. There's some nightmare scenarios there where it seems all dystopian, where everything's going to get hacked, everyone's data is going to get stolen. What if you start accepting some of those realities and becoming more transparent with your operational data anyway? So we talk about transparency in markets. Part of absolving the cybersecurity burden is being honest and open with what you do anyway. So why are you afraid of this information being exposed? Is it actually private? Is it, HIPAA information? Is it respecting individual privacy, or is it something that you just don't want people knowing because you're embarrassed by it?
Mhm.
It's really good that point around interconnectedness is something I frankly never, well, you do consider, but it's a great callback to the conversation here, and well said. All right, I'm not going to dwell. I'm going to make sure all these questions get answered. And here you go, David King. I cried when I read this business book that tells you something. So, and it's aged, but it's still pretty darn cool if you're interested in how you might structure differently to value the worker and that flexibility. John Bell says, my CEO signed. His commitment is genuine, but it is a journey. We'll see if the markets allow CEOs to create value beyond shareholder value. That's why we have a rich EC and G program. Yeah, that's you have to play in the market that exists, not a future one, but how might we also change said markets, reform or rise up other markets? I was opining on that delicate balance of being a fund manager and needing to return value, period, while doing what Erica was saying is it's a both and conversation, not an either or conversation. Totally worthy. And if I mess up in the journey, so be it, but not going to allow it to continue to be an either or. Harold, you got a question here, I think. Let me just read it. If a result of the pandemic is reshoring industry, a reasonable assumption is that products will become more expensive. How will work look in this world? Will this drive a massive move to automation and thus create an even further diminution in the workforce?
So I'll try to jump in a little bit on that one. I think, first of all, I don't think it's just reshoring industry that is going to make products more expensive. We're also looking at, again, how do we pay people a fair and equitable wage for, and we've shifted our perspective on what we view as essential work and why we need to think about employee pay a little bit differently. But I'll also say, in concert with that conversation are, for the first time, some really, I would say, in dialogue across multiple stakeholders about the idea of a universal basic income. And so, again, I think these things can't happen in isolation. They have to be connected to creating a system that says, yes, products will become more expensive. Therefore, yes, we need a system that allows more people to have access to more products. And that requires taking care of people in that system in a different way. One of the concerns, or one of the things that we've seen, a trend, is the income equity gap has just gotten larger and larger and larger. And that is actually a real economic issue for our country. And if we can start thinking differently about how we distribute income more equitably, we actually will benefit our economy for everyone.
It's interesting. And Sarah brings up a really good, real acute, understandable example of how Department of Health went back, because talking 0.05% of the cost acquiring PPE from Asia than the US. It's a huge gap. The Department of Health has the onus of spending taxpayer dollars wisely, right? And there is this other force. So it puts the friction in stark relief, I think. So good. That's a really good conversation, and not an easy one, but an important one. Really cool. Let's see, Dan, did I miss any questions? You posted Francisco's from earlier, which is great. Let's see, who else has got a good question, a good meaty question?
I don't
See,
have
on that last point, TJ, that Sarah brought up a good point in our breakout session, actually, that, you know, her book on the new collar workforce, talking about when we do resume manufacturing in some sectors, and also what kind of manufacturing jobs are we bringing back. It's not about bringing back, it's redefining what's being manufactured and what domestic manufacturing is. What are we producing? So if it's impossible to produce it at the same cost, COVID and this pandemic has accelerated all these trends, as Erica brought up, that this is just another accelerant to get us into the adaptation of manufacturing. We still need to make things, but what are we going to make and how are we going to make them?
That's good. Another good question from you, Francisco. And it's interesting to think about. If it's become easy to create a website, do you believe it will become easy, or, you know, part of larger, even medium, larger organizations to have your own video communication system, and not rely on a Zoom that is a separate company with its own security protocols? So it has a bit of a cybersecurity question to it, but also maybe market opportunity, or where is video going, and privacy. And it maybe sort of kind of ties in with Ken's question around privacy concerns and work from home and stuff. But any thoughts from you, Erica or Travis?
Well, we're now seeing a view of people we haven't seen before. You know, but behind me is my home office window and some switches that I'm not sure why they don't work. And you see all those little details of people's environments that you haven't seen before. So their professional face becomes more humanized in a way. I think that's really powerful. Privacy concerns, there's options to deal with that. There's encryption. There's a few different layers and levels there. So this comes back to, what are you talking about? Why are you talking about it? Who are you talking with? And how do those conversations need to be protected? Why do they need to be protected? What are you representing or feeling forced to represent? I think there's even new culture emerging now around, do we always have to have our video on? Do we always have to have, always be broadcasting? Can we just listen? So the idea that these new nuances are being explored, that's going to result in a new personalized declaration of how we communicate. I think what's important to ask in a company is, maybe this is a prompt now to say, how do you want to communicate? How do you best work? And for some people, they really need that creative, uninterrupted time. And this is an opportunity to empower that. So all of a sudden, as a developer, you can just focus and really crank out something incredible. As a creative, you can write or make something that really is different than you could have ever done when you were in a setting with distractions, or you felt like you were always being watched or something. So that's a very different dynamic. I think work from home, there's a balance here where you're merging these two environments that used to be separate. So it can be really unhealthy. It can also be really empowering. It's really up to the individual.
I'll pop in too. I think there's startup opportunity there too. Just in the same way, there's a lot of different project management software. I think there's now room for a lot of different types of video conferencing, video meeting software. We've been poking around with a new startup. I guess it's not absolutely new, but it's getting a lot of attention now. It's remo.co. Was that the URL? So Engages, like there's a plethora out there, and maybe they were all there, but nobody paid them much mind because the market timing wasn't right, but now it's right. In the same way, Francisco, I do think like video platforms for niche markets, industries, ones that are hyper focused on cybersecurity implications, because you are a cybersecurity company trying to do video calls. you know, I think there's going to be room for lots of new startups in that area, and that's something I'm excited about. Same with learning, right, Erica? You've been looking at quite a few platforms for what does actual good remote distance learning look like. Anything that you've seen that you're super excited about there?
You know, I think what I would say is what I've always said is a tool is a tool is a tool, and it's really how you use the tool to humanize your interactions. And so I think that we can get a little too caught up in the technology. Technology needs to support authentic communication. And to Travis's point, one of the things that he said that I just want to elevate is we're asking the question now, how do you want to communicate? How do you want to engage in ways that we've not universally asked our employees before, but we've been forced to ask it. And I think it goes beyond just what type of tool do you want to use, but when are you best communicating with others? You know, some of us are early birds, some of us are night owls, you know. How do we want to interact when we're having an off day? How do we want to interact when I'm sick and I don't want to show my video, even though that's a standard norm? So I just think we're really seeing the importance in ways that we've never probably worked through of communication protocols, and really honoring and customizing and personalizing the options. And I think that's what the tools will allow us to do, is like figure out what you need first and then find the tools that allow you to do that best.
I'm glad these are recorded so I can listen to that again at some point, because you're talking about asking good questions and this kind of journey of awareness. We're in the business context here, so for founders, I've found my own leadership journey, when I look back about how I messed up on X, Y, and Z, it was typically because I wasn't even asking certain questions. Not that I wasn't doing something I knew I should have done, but it was because I had a complete blind spot. And that's a really great point. Well taken, Erica. That and I saw somebody else in the chat word it really well here. Start with the learning experience, the work experience, the investment experience you want to create, then ask what technologies need to affect it.
I just got to call out that it was another Erica that had that brilliant comment.
It's powerful. It's a powerful name this morning.
DJ, could I ask a follow-up? Sorry, Erica, just a quick question, just because something's been, you know, I've been thinking a lot about unions recently. Does the same apply for group formations and structures and those sorts of things? Are those just tools to help achieve what you want to do, or is there a little bit difference in terms of, like, you know, humans coming together to achieve something and putting some sort of union or other structure around it?
Wow, that might be a better question for Travis, but what I'll say is yes. I mean, you know, it goes to, I'm a fan of Simon Sinek, you know, it goes to start with the why, right? And I think too often we get caught up in the how and the what. And so to me, it's like, look first to the why and then look at the how and the what. And with that, I'm going to see if Travis has a more brilliant insight on that.
I don't think I do, but there's a story that comes to mind on, we should have focused on the why a little more on our product, certainly, but we took a different approach and asked how to start off our meeting. So you talked about questions, Erica. I think it's really powerful that to be honest to start. There was a practice in what's called a stand-up meeting at the startup in Southeast Asia. There was about 25 of us, but by the time we had scaled up, we would stand in a circle and we would do a stand-up meeting, usually twice a week, sometimes once a day if we could get to that frequency. But instead of starting that with what usually happens is, okay, everyone's standing, you can only stand for so long, so it's intended to be a quick meeting. We started with, how do you feel? And the idea was, we were based in Southeast Asia. most of the team were Thai or some regional Asian background, and for everyone else, there was a common thread of you either spoke English or Thai. So one of the vulnerable things was I would try to do my stand-up in Thai, and then the Thai developers and staff would try to do their stand-ups in English. So we would come to that meeting point. But starting out with how do you feel, there's so much language, and especially there's so many words in the Thai language that talk about emotion and feeling. You can get really rich and vivid with that. And once you have that not out of the way, but once you've shared that, then everything else becomes so much more honest and real and efficient. And the idea was that you get that, and then all of a sudden you actually reveal what you're struggling with, what your issues are. And then someone who's already empathized with you and understands what you're dealing with jumps in to help. So coming out of those stand-ups, we saw, just like we have breakout rooms in this session, the breakouts to solve problems that have been lingering for weeks or months. How do people feel? Be honest about it. And then you get this honest, hyper-efficient connection to break out. It sounds woo-woo to start, and then you see how efficient it is with the conversion. So developers back end and front end talking to each other, business and marketing talking to development, product talking to business, everything, all that cross collaboration that you want comes together when you ask and start from that basis of how are you feeling as a human being? And then you have that connection, and the super honest efficiency comes from it.
Great.
It's really cool. I could sit here for hours and listen to you both and field these questions. I think our time is up. We like to do one more practice of putting out there in the group chat here.
Let's first give a applaud or claps.
I always forget to do that, yes.
Jazz hands, all the things. Thank you so much. Now, TJ, we can do the cool signing off thing.
Name, contact info, and an ask. You're working on something, you're seeking some type of person's advice, you need a connection. What is one specific ask that if I read this, if everybody reads this and says, oh, I could help with that, or I know somebody that I can make an introduction, that we might make a connection here and help you out. So Dan's got his here. He's looking to connect with startups that want to be a part of an active community of founders and mentors building ventures. That's our Activate New Mexico program. Contact Dan if you are interested in talking to him about that. Becky Lowe of Canopy Digital Innovations creates apps and tech solutions for positive impact. She is interested in connecting with other founders and discovering opportunities where she might contribute as a technical co-founder. Erica, thanks for joining. Jump off, don't hurt yourself jumping, but go ahead. Rick Shore is looking for a potential co-founder for a startup and can share more one-on-one. Put your contact info there, Rick, email or private chats, whatever you want to do. Just instructions on how to get a hold of you. You too, Becky. What's everybody else working on? How might we be able to help here? There you go, there's your email address. Johanna Nelson, thanks for coming again, Johanna, and participating last week. She is looking for companies in rural areas that want to be interviewed about energy efficiency. There is her email address. She's also looking to connect to folks who want to discuss increasing access to capital to biz in New Mexico. I'm going to raise my hand for that one. And it's a conversation that we're already a part of, but I want to be more of a part of it personally and professionally. There's Becky's contact information. Thank you. Sierra of InBizWorks, which is in our Activate New Mexico program right now, an online entrepreneurial startup platform. MVP is ready for launch, looking for feedback, input, and agency partnerships. If you are an entrepreneur looking to want to kick the tires of their platform and or a partner who might use it, contact Sierra. Thank you. Dirk Davidson, hello, sir. Across social, at Dirk Davidson, looking to help tech companies protect themselves and manage risk. Awesome. So if your company needs protection, risk management, contact Dirk. John Bell at Travelers, looking to help and support startups and entrepreneurs in New Mexico as I move here, and help evolve from my big corporate gig. We should get in touch with John. Absolutely. Awesome. Opayemi, hope I said your name right. I remember I congratulated you, I think, in your LinkedIn post around finishing. Deep dive, if I'm not mistaken, but looking for local business interested in optimizing or building their websites. Sweet, and you got your website URL there. Thanks for joining us, and awesome stuff. Sarah is interested in finding more info on employer needs for workers. We work with IT apprenticeship programs via IBM with the U.S. Department of Labor funding. Thank you, Sarah. Ken is at jomo.health, the logistics platform for home healthcare, looking to speak with agency or provider administrators or owners. So if you know an agency owner of home healthcare or somebody who's in the decision-making threshold, talk to Ken. Richard, you are looking for developers, founders, partners, friends to build an AR app web-based startup here in New Mexico. Gave me a tongue twister. Thank you. Bill, good luck. Great to see you, Bill. Adam, meaningfully making inventory breeds, like to chat with family businesses. They like to save themselves time and money by organizing their space and ideas. All right. Thank you. Usama is looking for people with good with data for a new sports gambling and politics startup. Wow, cool combination, right? Also in our Activate program. Good to see you, Usama. Please message me on LinkedIn if that sounds interesting. And Tolu, web developer with website. Oh, same website. Awesome. Thank you for joining us again, Tolu. And Dan, you remind us, take this survey. If those who are here still on the call could please take this survey. Tell us the good, bad, and ugly of this session, and we will be in touch. Please join us for our demo day, Activate New Mexico Demo Day next Friday. It'll be not this time, but afternoon, 1 p.m. Easy to sign up. You're going to love these 5 startups and what they're doing. Lots of them very COVID responsive, very sustainability minded in what they're trying to achieve. So really good part of this conversation. Let's keep it up, connect with each other, connect with us, and we will stay engaged in the form of our next series, which you can hear about by following us on the socials, or going to abqid.com, subscribing to the newsletter, or send a carrier pigeon to my house through the smoke, and I will send it back with a note attached to its foot. What do you call it? Yeah. That's it for me. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.
Bye.
Thanks, y'all.